mental health providers today and specialists, the majority are Western educated, European American educated. Even those working in the region, the sector is tiny, as you know better than I from your work. And so, yes, sometimes there is a bit of a clash of, I don't want to say clash of civilizations, it's a big term and it's not the case, but yes, there is some friction between the terms that we might come with, encountering communities that are based on very different cultural values. So the way that I would approach this question, I think that any concern or question or perspective on mental health is helpful. Any approach can be helpful in any context. However, the way that I look at it is that, however, there might be a bit of friction and conflict between a certain theory, let's say, or understanding about a certain notion, which I'll give you some examples about, and the culture where the person comes from. So for example, the notion of creating boundaries. You know, it's a very, very big topic in mental health. And I would say, especially in Euro-American mental health approaches, which is that, so what does boundaries mean? I think it'd be important to define that. So my point is a bit clearer. You know, boundaries within ourselves is the notion that sometimes we haven't been protected enough as a child, let's say, in terms of having our say, in terms of our life or what we wanted or what we didn't want, or the people that we were comfortable around or not. So we didn't feel protected enough, let's say, as an example. And so we grow up not having boundaries. So not knowing how to protect ourselves, for example, or not being able to detect if something's actually healthy for us or not, or somebody is healthy for us or not. Also not knowing how to manage our energy. So giving too much or giving too little, or, you know, those kinds of things. That's the notion of boundary, is where does it stop? It's where do you finish as a person in terms of your space with others, and does the other person's space begin? It's a really important notion. This can be extremely challenging in Arab culture, Middle Eastern cultures, and other more traditionally connected communities still, you know, more sort of communities that are still very much still connected to their traditions and their notions of community, of family, of the place of seniors in a family, the place of a father, the place of a mother, the place of uncles, of aunts, of grandparents. So you talk to somebody as a psychotherapist about those relationships, and maybe, you know, I might have perceived something that is around boundaries, around an experience of the boundaries of my client having been overstepped, that might very well inform where they're finding themselves today, and their suffering and their confusion and their burnout. Some people come with burnout that is tens and tens of years old, like just living a life of burnout, basically, which is not always related to work. It's just related to living without boundaries also. So when we might start to explore the story of boundaries, it can be very challenging for them to even think that they can go and re-question what was happening in their household, to be curious about it and demand, you know, sort of, how can I, is it okay to, like, what are you asking me to do? Am I really revisiting how my father was in the household, or how my mom's relationship is with me, or what is demanded of me today as a 35-year-old of my parents? So these notions can be very threatening, because they might question first the entire history of the family, which can be very threatening, especially for families, you know, families in more traditional sort of communities, including some in the Middle East. The family bonds are maintained very, very tightly until forever, you know, until the end of life. And also some families live together, literally live together. The father, the mother, the children, their families, the other children's family, the cousins, they all live around each other all the time. And so to come with those notions can be very, very threatening for their entire system. So this is to be handled very, very sensitively. And I often try to explain to people that the fact that we can revisit those things does not mean that you have to go and destroy your family, or that you have to go and abandon your family or betray yourself or them. However, to understand your own story and really be able to go within and understand what the root cause of some of your current behaviors is, it is important to give yourself permission. And I'll support you here with the guilt. Guilt will come up as we do this. Feelings of having betrayed them will come out. Feelings of having broken the sanctuary of the family by speaking about them. This is all stuff that comes up in the process. So I do this work as long as I can respect and acknowledge the fact that it's a challenge culturally for us to go there. I think it's really important. Respect to the family that we're with, because it's a sanctuary and it's a sacred thing. And so it has to be done very, very sensitively. So I answered you here around boundaries. I can speak of other things as well, if you want me to give you a couple of other examples. Thinking about the place of men in society, or speaking about the place of a woman in society. You know, we live in modern times, 2024, and with the visibility that we all have onto the world through social media, through mainstream culture, television, films, Netflix, everything, there's a lot of exposure to other ways of living. You might have, you know, a lady living in a village somewhere in the Gulf, or a young boy also, and looking at what life looks like in other places in the world can be a very, very troubling thing if people are finding themselves to be a little bit disconnected from their own culture and finding things that they're more leaning towards in terms of what kind of man they want to be or what kind of woman that she wants to be, you know. And so when people come to therapy, it's to be kind of get real with some of those things. And it also can be very threatening, because what they've been taught and what they have been exposed to and what their culture of origin is based on are these very clearly defined notions about what it is to be a man, what the expectations are, what a man looks like, what a man does. And same for a woman. And so for them to come and for us to start to sort of go there, if this is what they're bringing, can also be very scary. So these notions about gender identity, for example, or freedom, or freedom of expression, or freedom of mobility, freedom to work, or freedom to ask of the wife to contribute equally to a household when it comes from a man. This, you know, it's too much pressure on me as a man. Like, what am I supposed to do? How am I going to be perceived, though, by my family, by my father, by my community? You know, there is so many challenging topics around gender as well, and gender roles, and what it means to be a modern, possibly, you know, Arab man today. You know, what do you hold on to? What do you let go of? And what are the implications of that within your culture if you were to change a little bit or make different choices? And so when you talk about freeing yourself up and becoming free and getting empowered, sometimes they're confronting some real challenges in terms of the changes that is called upon them to do and what the repercussions might be. Another aspect that can culturally be challenging is notions of people having a sort of crisis of meaning or existential crisis in their lives. Because those experiences are very significant and very real. Many people go through them, where everything seems to just not make sense anymore in somebody's life, where their systems of survival and of being have just come to an end. They don't seem to be working anymore for them. They're like up against the wall and they don't know how to break through. And what happens if we recognize that they're having a major existential crisis, which means like having big questions. Sometimes what happens for them is that, does this mean I'm questioning my faith, my religious faith? You know, what is the place of God in life? I mean, what is that? It can be extremely threatening, scary, and feel like actually a scary betrayal of faith. And again, of things that are associated with that, the community, the family, the education, the culture. And also of people's identities. I mean, it's hugely fundamental religious practice in many of those cultures. And so there is a way to sort of bring those questions while reassuring people that it does not mean that you have to drop your faith, or that your faith is wrong as such, or that we are trying to separate you from that. There are ways where these two things live together. On the contrary, your faith might be of great support. But, you know, can we in this space, at least the therapeutic space that we have, give yourself permission to ask yourself the questions that are meaningful to you, just so that we can find some answers So there's always about giving people the reassurance and the respect for their culture that they come with. Otherwise, it can be very threatening, and they could get out of the process and never find healing opportunities again because of that, because they feel it's threatening a lot of resources. The last thing I'll say about that, because I know I spoke about boundaries earlier, is this idea of connection. Which is very common in sort of Middle Eastern cultures, let's say. Connection, community, friends, neighbors, family. It's huge. The community is absolutely, it's almost imperative. You cannot live isolated in those cultures. It's absolutely part of who you are. And that actually helps. And there's another conflict between Eastern, if you like, culture and the Western mental health approach, where you're like setting boundaries and becoming more self-reliant and reparenting yourself. And, look after yourself, learn to look after yourself, and then you have your own back and you're done. And almost sometimes it can feel like a very isolating process, through healing, let's say. Oh, so I'm going to end up, basically disconnecting from very important people in my life. And then I'm just independent and I'm good. Actually, no, that's not the idea. That's not healthy, because we are intrinsically social people. We need each other. It's inbuilt. The human beings are social beings. There's no way around it. And so when we are working with cultures, especially where that is particularly important, we cannot ask them to cut those ties necessarily. They might choose to cut some, but community can be wonderful and is wonderful. And for cultures that define themselves through it, they're imperative. And so how can they keep that, but maybe become a bit more discerning in terms of what's nourishing and what isn't for them within the community, for example?